The tow truck's winch whined as it lifted the gleaming white Porsche off the ground, its tires swinging ever so slightly above the concrete. DeShawn Miller didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Arms folded across his chest, he stood on his porch, watching the scene unfold like a man who had waited long enough. For months, his driveway had become an unauthorized pit stop for a neighbor who believed rules were for other people. She dismissed his notes, ignored his warnings, and laughed off every polite conversation. But today was different. No more favors, no more second chances. As the tow truck rolled off down the block with her luxury SUV in tow, the silence said everything. This wasn't just about a parking space. It was about boundaries, respect, and what happens when you keep pushing someone who's been nothing but patient. DeShawn didn't raise his voice. He didn't slam doors. He just picked up the phone and let the consequences do the talking. DeShawn Miller was the kind of man most people didn't notice at first. Not because he was shy or forgettable, just because he didn't demand attention. At 38, he had the quiet confidence of someone who'd seen enough to know when to speak up and when to let things slide. A high school history teacher by day, DeShawn spent his evenings tending to his lawn, fixing up his grill, or sitting on the porch with a glass of sweet tea and a stack of student essays. His house wasn't flashy, but it was his pride. One-story brick, painted shutters, a yard he kept trimmed like clockwork, and a driveway that fit his car just right. A veteran, he carried the discipline of the military with him, but never the bravado. He believed in routines, respect, and minding your business. He waved at neighbors, helped shovel driveways when it snowed, and had never once missed trash day. The neighborhood knew him as steady, reliable, the type of guy who would lend you a tool and not expect it back immediately. He never caused trouble and never asked for much, but if you look close, you'd see it in his eyes. DeShawn didn't tolerate disrespect, and he sure didn't hand out warnings forever. When something crossed the line, he handled it, not with shouting or drama, but with action. And for one entitled neighbor who treated his driveway like public property, that quiet resolve was about to become a very loud wake-up call. Lana Whitmore moved into the neighborhood with a flair that turned heads and rolled eyes. Her Porsche gleamed like a trophy, and her sunglasses rarely left her face, even indoors. She wasn't loud, but everything about her said she expected the world to bend just slightly in her favor. Within a week, she was on the HOA board. Within a month, she was correcting mailbox heights and suggesting porch color schemes. People smiled, nodded, then rolled their eyes the second her back was turned. But Lana didn't care. She saw herself as the standard bearer of suburban order. When she first started parking in DeShawn's driveway, it was with that same air of entitlement. Just a quick drop-off, just a moment, just because the curb in front of her own house felt too inconvenient. Her apologies came with tight smiles and zero sincerity. "Just running in for a sec," she'd chirp, waving dismissively as if DeShawn's property line were a formality. She never asked. She assumed, and every time he spoke up, her tone hinted that he was the problem. Lana didn't yell, didn't curse. She weaponized politeness and power. She was the kind of neighbor who'd call the cops on your barbecue, then blame you for the smoke. It was a Thursday evening when DeShawn came home to find not just Lana's Porsche in his driveway, but a second vehicle, a black Audi with out-of-state plates, wedged behind it, blocking access to his garage completely. He sat in his car for a long minute, jaw clenched, eyes locked on the scene, like he was trying to will it away. But the cars didn't move. He stepped out, took a slow breath, and walked up to Lana's door. No answer. He knocked again, harder. Still nothing. Curtains shifted in the front window, but no one came. He left a note, firm, direct, but respectful. When he returned the next morning, the cars were gone, but so was the note. Not a word from Lana. No apology, no explanation. That night it happened again. Different car, same spot. This time he didn't knock. He stood at the edge of his lawn, hands on hips, staring at the Porsche like it had parked itself there on a dare. His patience was running out, not in a loud or impulsive way, but in that slow, tightening coil that warned something was about to snap. The driveway wasn't just a place to park. It was a boundary. and she was crossing it again and again like it didn't matter. What Lana didn't know, or maybe didn't care to see, was that DeShawn had given her every chance, every note, every warning, every knock. And now she was one more cross line away from learning what quiet consequences look like. Saturday morning rolled in warm and bright, the kind of day meant for yard work and iced coffee. DeShawn stepped out with his rake in hand and froze. Lana's Porsche was in his driveway again, this time angled like she'd parked it blindfolded. He stared at it for a long time, then calmly set his rake down and walked next door. Lana opened the door mid-laugh, still holding her phone, wearing a silk robe and zero concern. "DeShawn," she said, stretching his name like it was an inconvenience. "Problem?" He nodded toward the car. "That's not your property." She gave a dismissive shrug. "I had friends over last night. No street parking. Thought it wouldn't be a big deal." Her smile was practiced, polite on the surface, hollow underneath. "It is a big deal," he replied. "I've asked you more than once." She blinked, mock confusion washing over her face. "You're really this upset about a driveway?" His jaw flexed, but his voice stayed level. "I'm not upset. I'm done." Her smile cracked, just slightly. "I'm on the board, you know. I'd hate for us to have tension over something so small." DeShawn looked her dead in the eye. "Then stop making it big." He walked away without waiting for her to answer, each step down her porch like the click of a timer counting down. That conversation, casual as it sounded, was the last hand extended. He'd been more than fair. He'd tried diplomacy, but respect was a two-way street, and she'd made it clear she wasn't interested in sharing it. As he stepped back into his house and closed the door behind him, the line had officially been drawn. The next time she crossed it, there'd be no warning, no knocking, no more wasted breath. Just action. Clean, legal, final. That night, DeShawn sat on his couch with the TV on low and a folder open beside him, not for lesson plans, but for something more personal. Inside were printed photos, a copy of his property deed, and a timeline he'd started weeks ago. Every date she'd parked in his driveway, every note he'd written, every time she brushed him off. He wasn't a man who liked conflict, but there was a difference between starting drama and standing up for yourself. Still, part of him wrestled with the idea of towing her car. Was it too much? Would it make him look petty? But the more he sat with it, the clearer it became. This wasn't about ego. It was about boundaries. And if he didn't enforce them, no one else would. The HOA had already made that clear. When he'd called, the woman on the line sounded bored before he even finished explaining. "Sir, unless there's damage to your property, there's not much we can do. It's a neighbor-to-neighbor issue." Neighbor to neighbor, he thought, but only one of them was acting like one. He hung up and pulled open his laptop. Towing services, legal statutes, city codes. He read them all. There was no mystery here, no hidden agenda. Just a woman who thought she was above the rules, and a man finally ready to remind her she wasn't. A text buzzed on his phone, one of his students asking about a makeup test. DeShawn answered it calmly, professionally, then went right back to his research. He wasn't angry, not anymore. Anger passed. This is the strategy now. If she parked there again, she'd be gone before the sun went down. No warning, no door knocks, just a tow truck and the weight of her own arrogance. And when she came knocking after that, it wouldn't be for small talk. It would be to learn, maybe for the first time, what consequences actually looked like. It happened the following Friday, the kind of day that left DeShawn drained before he even pulled into the neighborhood. Parent conferences, a surprise fire drill, and a last-minute staff meeting had stretched his patience thin. All he wanted was to slide into his driveway, heat up leftovers, and disappear into the couch. But as he turned the corner onto his street, there it was. Lana's Porsche, centered in his driveway like it had rolled off a showroom floor and parked itself with purpose. No effort to pull over. No care. Just bold, blatant disrespect. He didn't honk, didn't get out and pace. He simply pulled to the curb, turned off the ignition, and sat there for a moment, breathing slow and steady like a boxer before the bell. Then he reached for his phone, scrolled to the number he'd saved days ago, and hit the phone. The dispatcher at the towing company didn't need much. He gave the address, confirmed ownership, and within 20 minutes, a flatbed truck rumbled up the street. The driver, a wiry guy in his 40s with mirrored shades and a clipboard, nodded like he'd done this 100 times. "It hers?" he asked. DeShawn nodded. "Parked on private property without permission." The man looked around, then reached for the winch. "We'll make it quick." It was oddly satisfying watching the car get lifted, its front wheels dangling just above the concrete. No one came outside. No one yelled. And then, just as the driver finished strapping it down, Lana's front door flew open. She stomped out in lounge pants and house slippers, phone already in hand. "What the hell is going on?" she snapped. DeShawn stayed where he was, hands in his pockets. "You parked in my driveway," he said, calm and clear. "So I had it towed." Her face went red fast, the kind of flush that travels up the neck and into the ears. "You can't just do that." He didn't flinch. "Actually, I can. And I did." The tow truck pulled away slowly, the Porsche shrinking into the distance. Lana stood frozen, eyes wide, mouth open, unsure of whether to scream or cry. But DeShawn didn't stick around to find out. He turned, walked back to his front door, and closed it behind him without another word. The line had been crossed, and now the game was different. The tow wasn't the end. It was just the opening move. DeShawn knew Lana wouldn't take it quietly, but he didn't expect just how fast she'd try to spin the narrative. The next morning, he found a note taped to his door in red marker. Not signed, but unmistakably her handwriting. It read like a scolding letter from a camp counselor. "In this community, we value kindness and communication. Resorting to drastic measures only creates division." He smiled, crumpled it up, and tossed it in the bin without a second thought. But it didn't stop there. Over the next week, 3 separate HOA violations showed up in his mailbox. One claimed his porch plants violated uniform aesthetics. Another cited the position of his trash bins. The third said his mailbox needed a fresh coat of paint. The kicker? Those ferns had been there for 2 years. The trash bins hadn't moved from their usual spot. The mailbox? Painted 6 months ago. It was clear Lana was reaching, using her position on the board to strike back. Still, DeShawn didn't react. Instead, he documented everything. Photos, timestamps, letters, all carefully tucked into his growing folder. Quietly, the neighborhood started to notice. People he barely spoke to waved more often. One man across the street slipped him a note on lined paper. "She fined me for my kid's skateboard ramp. Let me know if you need backup." Then came the flyers, laminated, taped to mailboxes. "Is towing your neighbor's car the answer?" they asked in bold, passive-aggressive print. DeShawn took his down and laughed out loud. Her desperation was starting to show. And it wasn't just him who saw it. Parents from his school mentioned it in passing. A few whispered, "Good for you." Even some of the other board members had gone quiet, distancing themselves. Lana was trying to flip the script, to paint herself as the victim, but the brush strokes were sloppy and the canvas was cracking. DeShawn kept his routine, mowed his lawn, graded papers, watered his plants, and waited. Because he knew something she didn't. When you wage war with someone who prepares in silence, the blow never lands where you expect. Her mistake wasn't the parking, it was underestimating who she was up against. And the moment of reversal was already on its way. The monthly HOA meeting was usually a sleepy affair. Budget updates, landscaping complaints, the occasional noise grievance. But this one felt different the moment DeShawn walked in. For the first time, neighbors looked up from their clipboards when he entered, nodding quietly, a few offering small smiles. He took a seat near the front. Not out of pride, but because this time he had something to say. Across the room, Lana sat stiffly in her usual spot at the head of the table, her face composed but pale, like someone holding a handful of bad cards. The meeting began as always, but it didn't take long before one of the board members cleared his throat and shifted the energy. "Before we continue, we need to address a matter brought forward by several residents," he said, glancing toward DeShawn. "It concerns inappropriate use of HOA authority and retaliatory complaints filed against a homeowner." Lana's head turned sharply, but the board member kept going. "We've reviewed documents, timestamps, and multiple statements from residents. It appears there's been a pattern of harassment directed at Mr. Miller." The room went still. Lana opened her mouth, but the board chair raised a hand. We'll allow a response in a moment. But first, Mr. Miller, would you like to share anything? DeShawn stood, not with drama, but with clarity. He spoke plainly, laying out what had happened, not just to him, but to others who'd quietly endured her fines, warnings, and tactics. He didn't embellish. He didn't need to. The facts spoke for themselves. And when he sat down, no one clapped. They didn't need to. The silence said enough. Lana's defense came thin and fast. This is a misunderstanding. I was only trying to keep order. He towed my car without cause, but it didn't land. The chairwoman leaned forward. Lana, we've reviewed the footage, the photos, the documents. This isn't order, it's abuse of position. A vote was held. It wasn't close. Lana was officially removed from the board. Her power stripped, her influence fractured. And DeShawn? He didn't gloat. He simply nodded, gathered his folder, and left the meeting the same way he came in. Calm, composed, and carrying the quiet weight of truth. 3 days after the meeting, Lana's Porsche was back in DeShawn's driveway like nothing had happened, as if her removal from the HOA board meant nothing, as if the rules still didn't apply. This time, though, it wasn't just disrespect, it was defiance. DeShawn didn't bother knocking or writing another note. He didn't call the HOA or try to reason with someone who had proven she wasn't interested in reason. He just reached for his phone and made the same call he'd made before. The dispatcher recognized his voice. Same address? She asked. Same car? Yep, he said. Let's go ahead and do it. 15 minutes later, the tow truck rolled up. DeShawn sat in a folding chair on his porch, sipping from a bottle of water, calm as ever. The driver gave him a nod and got to work. Midway through strapping down the vehicle, Lana came flying out of her house like a storm in silk pajamas, arms flailing, voice shrill. You're doing this again? She shouted. Are you insane? DeShawn didn't rise. He didn't flinch. He simply looked her in the eye and said, You parked in my driveway again. What did you think was going to happen? She sputtered threats, said she had friends in the city office, warned him that he'd regret it. He let her talk. The truck pulled away, her car vanishing once more. And that's when she snapped. For the next week, she spiraled. She left notes on other neighbors' doors, filed more bogus complaints, called security 3 times in one afternoon, but no one bit. The neighbors had seen enough. She had worn out every ounce of goodwill she ever pretended to have. Then one evening, DeShawn came home and noticed something strange. His trash cans were missing. He checked the side of the house, then the curb. Nothing. It didn't take long to find them, stacked neatly behind Lana's garage like trophies. He took a photo, shook his head, and walked right over. She answered the door looking tired, worn thin. He held up his phone and simply said, You're done. She didn't argue. She just closed the door without a word. And just like that, the storm began to pass. Weeks passed, and slowly the neighborhood returned to its rhythm. No more flyers, no more phony violations, no more midnight calls to security over nonsense. Lana kept to herself, barely visible behind closed blinds, her once daily walks around the block now non-existent. Then one morning, a for sale sign appeared on her lawn, staked into the grass like a white flag. DeShawn didn't celebrate. He didn't gloat. He just stood at his front window, coffee in hand, and let out a long breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Peace, real peace, had finally returned. He could pull into his driveway without hesitation, knowing he wouldn't find someone else's car sitting where his belonged. He could tend to his lawn without side-eye glances from someone pretending not to watch. The quiet wasn't just physical, it was personal. The kind of silence that comes when respect is finally restored. Neighbors started stopping by more often, striking up real conversations. Some shared their own stories, their own quiet battles with Lana's rules and warnings. Turns out she hadn't just picked a fight with DeShawn. She'd been wearing people down for years, but no one had said anything until he did. He hadn't just stood up for himself. He'd opened the door for others to do the same. And that mattered, because sometimes all it takes is one person willing to call the line, hold it, and not let it go. DeShawn never raised his voice. He didn't need to. He stood his ground, and in doing so, changed everything. Some people believe they can push others around forever, because no one has ever pushed back. They confuse kindness with weakness and silence with surrender. But eventually they run into someone who's had enough, someone who doesn't raise their voice or throw punches, but simply stands their ground and lets the truth do the heavy lifting. That's when everything shifts. Respect isn't something you demand, it's something you earn or lose. And when the quiet ones speak through action, even the loudest voices fall silent. If this story hit home, stick with us at X Daily Stories. Real people, real consequences, and justice served with calm resolve. There's more to come.